everybody, to the virtual stage of the 92nd Street Y, coming to you from Williamsburg, Brooklyn tonight. My name is Jonathan Wall. I'm director of the Jewelry Center in Manhattan, and thank you for joining us here. I want to, first of all, thank Stellene Volandes, who I think you all know. This is Stellene's third talk with us to kick off New York Jewelry Week. And thank you for being here, Stellene. She is the editor of Town & Country magazine and the editorial director of Elle Decor. She is the author of Jewelry Masters, Mavericks, and Visionaries of Modern Design. And her newest, most beautiful book, Jewels That Made History, is out now. If you haven't seen it, run. Beautiful. Thank you, Stellene. And a big thank you to Melanie. Melanie Grant is a journalist who works at The Economist and the author of our book topic tonight, Coveted, Art and Innovation in High Jewelry, published by Phaidon. She has worked at the BBC, the Financial Times, at the Independent, amongst many others. She is the luxury editor of The Economist's sister publication, 1843, a very chic rag, I might say, for which she writes, styles, and commissions editing and an annual jewelry supplement. So welcome, Melanie, from London. I hope you're not going to be up too late with us tonight. And finally, Fernando Georges, who's joining us from Brazil, probably in a slightly better time zone. Fernando, initially studying Brazil, finished his master's degree at Central St. Martin's in London. His first jewelry line was launched with incredible acclaim. And since then, he has produced 10 more collections, again, to much love and acclaim across the world. And most recently, he was awarded by Town & Country the award for Best Diamonds in 2020. So thank you all for being here. I can't wait to dive into this talk. So I'm going to leave it over to Stellene, Melanie, and Fernando.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. And hello, everyone. And hello to Melanie and Fernando. And thank you to New York Jewelry Week for all that you do and all the attention that you bring to this art that we love. Melanie and Fernando, we are talking about this gorgeous piece of art that is Melanie's book, which is called Coveted, Art and Innovation in High Jewelry. And before we get to specific pieces and look at what elevates a piece of jewelry to art, I wanted to ask you both why you think it remains a challenge to convince some people that jewelry is in fact art.
Well, I would say, just jumping in there, that
yeah.
I think there's a snobbery in terms of the art world, in terms of how jewelry is perceived, and because it's something which often has a perceived value which is slightly different from other forms of art, I think it gets caught up in this kind of commodity area of being something which is about a store of wealth rather than art. So one of the main reasons I wrote this book was because every time I came across that opinion, it just infuriated me, because we know it can be art and it is art at a certain level. So that's the kind of core idea behind the book.
Fernando, as a creator, what's your take? Why do people want to prove us wrong when we know we are right?
Well, I think Mel articulated really well the idea that because it's a commodity, because there is added value, there's a real value to the materials in jewelry, there might be the beginning of the perception, but I also believe that there are a lot of people producing jewelry without the elevated care and the intention. I think that also weighs heavily against overall perception of jewelry. And I celebrate Melanie and her book because it puts jewelry as a culturally relevant form of art and form of expression, which is where I come from and where I approach my jewelry from. And I also believe that's what you see in jewelry.
Yes. Yes, well, why don't we, Melanie, before we look inside the pages of this book and identify some of the ways, Fernando, the idea that some jewelry is art and some is not, I think is an important part of our discussion tonight. And certainly in the pages of Melanie's book and Fernando, in your collections, certain traits of jewelry art emerge. But before we go into individual items of jewelry, Melanie, can you tell us a little bit about how this book came about and why you decided to write it now?
Well, I've been drawn to metal my whole life, and it started at the Tate. I think I went with my mum and I came across a sculpture when I was about 7, and I was just transfixed, and it was just something so powerful about metal. And then as I got older, my grandma used to let me wear her very nice jewelry. And you know, when you're a kid, the only people who will let you wear proper jewelry is someone like your grandma. And I remember sort of being in her garden, you know, bedecked while she was gardening, thinking like, this is just exactly me.
Right.
And then I got to the Economist and I was kind of styling and things, but I wasn't really writing at that point. And Cartier asked me to go to an exhibition at the Grand Palais. It was about 2013, and I kind of entered that hall one person, and I came out of it someone completely different. I kind of had a spiritual experience. It's quite weird to explain, but the beauty and the meaning and the history, it just knocked me sideways. I wasn't expecting to be that affected by it. And I got back and I wrote this blog, and I just knew I had to do it. I had to show it to more people and talk about it and understand it. So that was the beginning of it. And then as I wrote more, I realized there was a problem in that. There was definitely a gap between what I saw and what I was reading about in terms of how artistic jewelry could be.
Did Melanie freeze for a second?
Did she freeze or did she finish her answer? I think she.
Oh, now you're Melanie.
I'm still here.
She's still there. I think she just concluded her answer.
Yes.
Melanie, could we just? I remember, Fernando. Did you see that Cartier exhibit at the Grand Palais? It was sort of very much a historical survey.
I missed it, unfortunately.
It was remarkable in its success in connecting the Cartier designs that we will see now with their historical, the period in which they were created, what was happening before they were created, at the moment, and then after. And I know for myself, once jewelry is put in that context, you cannot see it nearly as product or commodity. You forever see it as an artifact and as decorative art that is influenced by the culture in which it was created as much as any other decorative art. Now, let's start with this small little necklace, which has an incredible story. But let's sort of put it to our test. And I'd love for you both to join in this. We're looking at this. This is, Melanie, why don't you tell everyone what necklace this is?
This is the Maharaja of Patiala's necklace. And it was kind of one of the most important necklaces, I would say, that the Maharajas kind of conjured up with Cartier. And I think that big central colored stone is a De Beers stone. And the Maharajas, as we know, would sort of turn up in the Place Vendôme with like trunks of jewels, you know, like hundreds of jewels, and they kind of merged a kind of Indian aesthetic with Cartier's love of sort of platinum and white diamonds. So it was a real fusion of cultures. And I think that really, you know, kind of shows how important jewelry is in terms of charting culture and history and how people come together. And
I'd love for you both to answer this because I think it'll set the groundwork as we continue to look at some of these pieces. What elevates this necklace from necklace to art? Fernando, why don't you start on this?
I think by being able to see this merging of cultures, it's already a great start. That it's not just an object. It's not. There is a lot of intention, and I think intention is very important when it comes to elevating a piece of jewelry to a combination of metals and stones to art.
Right.
It wants to express something more than just the combination of materials. I think that's a great start. And visually, it represents the time. It elevates everything that has been done around that era. I would start by saying that an object that has this power of expression, it's not just materials.
And Melanie, what makes this art to you, this necklace?
I think to me, you know, it took years to create. It took, you know, millions of years to form in the ground. It took somebody somewhere to compile that over many years. It's a unique piece of history which happens to be worn. But, you know, if it had traditionally been as part of a sculpture, we wouldn't be questioning its ability to be art. It just happens to be on the body.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it sums up one of the peak kind of eras in jewelry history in terms of just decadence. You know, I mean, if I was going to go back in time to a place, it would either be Cleopatra's court or it would be the Maharaja of Patiala, who had some of the best jewelry known to civilization. So for me, it is no question that it represents kind of a moment in time, as Fernando says, and it definitely is an exceptional thing. We'll probably never see it, you know, again, anything.
Right, and in fact, a lot of it is missing.
Yes, I think it was broken up, and I think a lot of the stones were sort of, you know, someone wandered off with them. Yes. And so, you know, this is a replica, but I think it definitely deserves a place in history.
Yes. And now let's go to the next slide. Certainly, immediately you see it, and this is an iconic piece of jewelry. Melanie, tell us about this brooch and the woman who wore it.
Well, the Duchess of Windsor, you could argue, is one of the key, I suppose, star makers in jewelry. You know, she kind of encouraged people like Cartier and Van Cleef to create moments in design history, because she had an interesting combination of the taste and the money to actually push design into a new era. And she was a serious collector, and she had a very flamboyant style. And again, this brooch is a very famous brooch in the Cartier archive. I don't know where it is now. Do you know more about that, Stellene?
It might be in the Cartier archive.
Fine. It's probably they buy their own pieces back.
It was sold, but I believe this was brought back. I want to talk though about the relationship between collectors and jewelers, because that's another element that elevates a jewel into art and elevates many jewelers into artists. And you mentioned the Duchess of Windsor, whose taste was, it was a signature, it was a very strong taste, and it was a very bold taste. She was not afraid, and she, in fact, brought many ideas to jewelers and dared them. You know, part of your book is about innovation, and of course, the Van Cleef zip necklace was initially her idea. It took many more years for them to actually be able to realize it. But what's the role of collectors? Certainly we know in the visual arts how collectors become patrons and support the artist and hence the art. What is the role, and Fernando, as an artist, I'd love for you to also answer this. What is the role of the jewelry collector in elevating a piece to art?
There is a simple and straightforward role that they have, that they first of all, they encourage the creativity that we put out in the world. By collecting, they make financially possible that we make more, and they also contextualize. They live the aspirational life that I put with passion in my jewelry and my designs. So the collectors, through the years, becoming a reality and developing a dialogue, they also shape and form the creativity that comes next. They give me room to be more adventurous, and they really, probably as much as me, influence the direction of jewelry and the jewelry history of the time. I don't think the Duchess of Windsor was making history when she was buying jewelry. She was acting on passion. She was wearing with you know, flair and passion, and her taste was just being expressed with those jewelries. But what they did in result is the most incredible collection with a selection of jewelers at the time that we look up to.
Right.
And I think there are women doing this right now.
Well, and we're looking at some of Fernando's art now, but I actually wanted to go back to the Cartier Panther because, Melanie, I wanted to ask you, this, of course, is a historic piece. It is, you know, we've learned that there still is someone who puts each spot on the Cartier Panthers by hand, right? I mean, and that element of the handmade and the one of a kind is another element of what elevates a piece of jewelry into art, I would assume.
Yeah, and what I like about Cartier is there is something for everyone. I mean, I was in, they had a pop-up in Harrods a couple of weeks ago, and they have pieces which are affordable, and they have these fantastic pieces which are, you know, an art form. And I love that about them. I love that everyone can have something, you know, high jewelry obviously can be very expensive, but I think it's important to have a sort of democracy so that everyone gets to experience it, because there's this perception that it's only for a certain sort of echelon of person. But I, you know, I think everyone can appreciate it. And I think Cartier do that very well. But at this level, obviously it's completely handmade. It's a unique piece. And it's such an expression of taste. And you can, you know, it's recognizable. It's a signature. You can just see it anywhere. And again, that's, I think jewelry is, it's made to be seen. And I think that's a key element, which is different from a lot of other art forms because they're just in someone's vault. You know, this is actually more for the people.
That's right, because it is meant to be worn in public for yourself, but also for other people to appreciate. And now, Melanie, as we move into Fernando's sculptures, because that really is what Fernando's jewelry is. How did you, the book is democratic in that the jewelry is all of the highest level, but it is both historic pieces like this Cartier Panther, and it is more contemporary pieces. How did you begin to decide and edit that sort of nuance between the historic and important and immediately recognizable and some of the more, you know, sort of modern artists working today?
Well, I remember doing an interview with a designer called Robert Lee Morris, who was a fantastic interviewee. And he said something that really struck a chord with me. He said, you know, great jewelry changes your frequency. And I think just like art, you're affected by it. And I kind of compiled a list really of all the pieces I'd seen in the last 7 or 8 years, which had kind of, I couldn't stop thinking about, which just really changed how I saw design. And so there are pieces which I hope are unexpected, and there are pieces which I think a lot of people know. But I tried to include things which for me had changed design or changed my perception of what jewelry could be in some way.
Now let's go, speaking of contemporary jewelry artists, Fernando's work is in these slides here. Fernando, what material is this?
This is a combination of opals, boulder opals from Australia and tanzanites. And then they are set in gold with a blue finish, just to kind of blend with the colors.
Amazing.
And become a lot about color.
Before, I want to hear about how you approach design, Fernando, because I think that's so revealing in this discussion of jewelry as art. But I also want to find out how you two first met, and Melanie, when you first saw Fernando's work.
Wow. Go on, Fernando, go for that one.
I mean, I remember that, you know, in my early days showing my collections in London, I remember Melanie approaching, and she used to work for The Economist, and it wasn't the usual, you know, jewelry requests. She wanted more information on a piece, she wanted to write, and she would put my work in this publication with all the other topics that are important in life, not only jewelry.
Right,
And
right.
that made it very memorable to me,
Yeah.
that she was very interested. She wanted to hear more. And we became connected, you know, digitally until we started meeting in my presentations. And every time we had long chats. And when she included me in the book, I was obviously humbled, but I didn't know the scale. And once now I have the book in my hand and I read her point of view being so historical, placing things culturally in their dates and seamlessly bringing this to the present and including contemporary artists, not just myself, some of my contemporaries that I admire and love. And I know they also have so much honesty in what they do. I think the solidification was this 3-hour conversations we had in my studio talking about life and jewelry, which ended up in the book. And since then we've been in touch.
Amazing. Amazing. Melanie, talk to us as we go through some of Fernando's pieces. Tell us why these pieces are included in a book. These are, you know how much I love these. These are
Cartier is wonderful. It takes so much to be this simple,
yes.
you know. And I think so much of jewelry, I'm a huge fan of simple jewelry as well, but big, simple jewelry. And I think so much of it, really big, so much of it is kind of, you know, the diamond pave has a lot to answer for. You know, it's great in some ways, but, you know, great design often has such a confident simplicity about it, which for me, this kind of thing is it's just pure sculpture. And I think Fernando's very brave in terms of his use of stones and how simple he is in some of his pieces.
Fernando, I remember when you first showed me, can we just go back to those earrings? Because I think people should know the material, and also the design is sculpture, and it is sculpted to be worn on the human body. So,
yes.
So tell us a little bit, first the material, and then your concept behind these.
So these pieces are 3 different types of minerals from Brazil. Actually, 3. There's a citrine in the beginning of it, and then it kind of grows into a layer of citrine, a layer of rose quartz, and a layer of amethyst. These are gemstones and materials that I grew up around. They're from Brazil, so that has a significance to me. And then the soft color combinations, the translucency, and they are mounted on a polished gold. So this collection and all of my collections, they come from a very simple gesture, some element of nature that then I complicate. Then I add, you know, ideas that are part of the jewelry world to communicate this simple idea. And then, you know, I try to convey this idea through design, through shapes and finishes and gesture. And with most of my work, there's also this part of how it fits on the body. Mm-hmm. So I imagine the jewelry doing a movement or affecting the way you look at a body or a woman or a person when they have these colors, you know, near their face, the illuminating of the face. So there are so many ideas that my approach comes from all these different parts, and when they start fitting together, and there's this moment of emotion that I see a sketch and I cannot wait to see it out of the paper. So it's a very powerful feeling when I managed to find what I wanted to say on paper, and then I work with people to get it out of paper, and extremely talented craftsmen. In this case, you know, the technique is very, very challenging, but we achieved it.
It's spectacular. Melanie, what was it that Robert Lee Morris said again? Great jewelry changes your frequency.
Frequency, yeah.
And that's really what Fernando is talking about. It changes even when you first see it realized. You have it changes. You have a primal reaction to it. It is emotional, and commodities don't do that.
No, because they're purely just to be made to be sold and to sort of their product, you know, and right. This is not product at all.
Let's see more of Fernando. These diamond earrings, TNC Jewelry Award winning earrings. Melanie, what makes this design, which has become a Fernando signature, what makes this piece of jewelry art?
Well, I think it's interesting because we talked a lot about diamonds in the interview, and Fernando did say that he resisted using diamonds in the beginning because they were so obvious, and you know, he called them steroids, because you don't have to do much else. You throw a few diamonds at something, it's a sparkly thing, that's it. And so he resisted for quite a long time, and then he went completely crazy and made entire collection of really kind of disco diamonds. But again, only he could sort of make this kind of sculptural, kind of almost ironic diamond. It's like a Christmas decoration, but like better. Only he could do this and make it this adventurous, you know. And everything he does, whether it's complex and very small or large and sculptural, it just looks like him. I mean, and that is so hard to do, as we know, Stellene, with all the the pieces that you talk about in your book. That unbelievable, undeniable sort of look across completely different collections is something which you just, I think, is a talent that's just you're born with. So for me, this is art because despite the diamonds, it feels artistic.
Yeah. And how much, we talked a lot about signatures, the Cartier signature, Fernando's signature. How, when you're looking at a piece of jewelry, how important it is for you as a jewelry writer and expert for a jeweler to have a signature?
I think it's crucial. And I think it's the thing that sets a lot of designers apart, really. You know, if you can't tell somebody's work in a sea of things, then, you know, all artists have a signature. I think it is part of being an artist. And it's not something you can consciously do. This is the problem. You know, you can't try and have a signature. If it's in you and it's out, then everyone can see it. But, you know, you can then try too hard and it doesn't really work. So I think that's, you know, and then when you have a signature, to keep it going, you know, to be consistent, to be true to it, that takes, you know, dedication.
Yes. Let's go to the next slide. Fernando, the thing about signatures as an artist, it can also, I imagine, become a challenge, right? So how do you, and you do have a signature, but how do you not repeat, right? Because innovation is also part of Melanie's book. And we see your collection is wildly innovative, but it is all united by this aesthetic. How do you manage that?
It is a challenge. It is a challenge, but I think this artistic part of me thrives under pressure. You know, you with jewelry, you also have to play with codes that are familiar. So it's not as simple as coming up with something new or a new shape or a new way to place the earrings. It's about considering everything that has been done before as well, and deciding where you will make it yours, where you will interfere with the traditional jewelry construction or the material or the way you combine or the scale. So I think that's how I find my voice, with a very personal sense of scale, sense of beauty. And I think the way I can evolve from one collection to the other is just finding a little thread, and also not overdoing creatively with one collection. I am very, how can I say, restrained with my creativity, so it can mature, it can be understood and absorbed by an audience, not only my clients or collectors, by an audience of people who are following jewelry. Those are all the things that come to my mind. You know, keeping a signature is also not giving everything at once.
That's really, I mean, that's the restraint that Melanie talked about also. And this idea that creativity is a treasure itself, right? And I think that in the sort of contemporary market, there's so much demand that to hold back is difficult, I bet sometimes, but necessary.
Completely. And being Brazilian, you know, here people are bubbly with their creativity and they jump from one thing to the other. When I moved to London, it was like polishing a rough stone. You know, they really like, if you say too much with one design, or if you explain your collection with too many sentences, you get lost. You have to focus. So this focus is very important as well for the signature.
Oh, wow.
It is.
That's really something. You know, I'd never to sort of, not control it, but to measure it in a way. Fernando mentioned scale, Melanie, and what we're looking at right now is a perfect experiment in scale. This is really something. Tell us about this necklace.
Well, I think this is Bulgari kind of at its best. And why I think Bulgari is interesting as a brand is because when I was doing the book, there were some brands that really surprised me. I thought I knew them. But, you know, doing a bit of research, you know, you find out that they're kind of, you know, they're Italian, but they're also, the founder was Greek, and that the Roman Empire, with all its vast kind of entrance from Europe and the Middle East and Africa, kind of fused all these cultures together in this very opulent style. And so, you know, the color, I think, that Bulgari used have really inspired lots of other designers. I know that Viren Begat, when I was talking to him, he saw a piece of Bulgari and like absolutely kind of was set on a course in terms of jewelry, and also Fawaz Grossi from De Grossegono. So I think Bulgari surprised me by how influential they've been in terms of color. And obviously Fernando talked about color, but this necklace for me is exactly what, you know, I love about high jewelry. And it's just an epic piece of sort of creativity. And, you know, if you were to see this live, you wouldn't sort of be able to walk past it and not have another look.
Right. No, it's epic. And it does scale, would you say, you know, again, sort of this continuing conversation about jewelry and art, how important is scale, both of the piece and of the ambition of the piece?
I think it's important because it is sculpture on the body. And, you know, demi-fine is rarely going to be, you know, this impactful, I would say. I mean, it's possible, but I think for me, the size is also part of the wow aspect of having something, you know, which is essentially kind of artistic.
Right. You mentioned that this was a piece of art worn on the body, and Fernando talked about that moment where he sees how an earring fits on a woman's ear. The difference, of course, between jewelry as art and other decorative arts is that it is meant to be worn. And how much should that play into it? If a jewel is beautiful and has the scale and all the things we mentioned, but it's unwearable, should it be considered art?
I would say yes, because I have jewelry I've never worn, but I just look at. And do you remember that collection a couple of years ago? Victoire de Castellane had some pieces in a Gagosian of her own, her personal.
Oh, the crazy flower.
The crazy kind of like acid blooms.
Yes.
And, you know, she mounted them on plinths. And I thought that was interesting because, you know, they were presented as a piece of art on a plinth in a world-renowned gallery.
Yes.
And, you know, the fact that she did that, I think was quite a provocative statement. And for me, they were sculpture. I wouldn't have to wear them. I could just look at them. But I don't think you have to wear them. I just think, you know, when the power of it kind of tells you if it is.
I agree. I agree, because the jewelry vocabulary, there are so many directions it can go. In the book, you can see Melanie speaking about such different expressions in jewelry, and not all of them are just about the way this piece relates to the body. Sometimes it is about the piece itself. Of course, if there is at least something related to the body to make it considered jewelry, it makes it easy. But I also remembered when Solange did those transformable objects that can be unfolded and mounted into jewelry was also very impactful for me. How the jewelry, it's not just about wearing them, but it's also about making them treasured in a room. Or, I mean, I envy who can own one of those pieces. They can look at it and then wear it.
Right.
And it takes on a life of its own, really. Often,
yeah.
You know, it becomes its own entity.
Right.
It does.
So sometimes it wears you, you know.
and is that, you know, I mean, that's it. So should that sort of be considered when a jewelry artist is making a piece? Should they consider how it will be worn?
I'd say not. I'd say you know, real artists are completely wild. It has to come out. They make it. They don't care if they sell it. They don't care if anyone wears it. It's a creation. It's born, and then hopefully somebody somewhere will see the significance and actually, you know, incorporate it into their lives. But I think often I talk to designers who make things and they never sell them. They can't bear to sell them. You know, they're not lesser pieces. They're just the entity just can't leave home, really. So I'm sure you know a few designers who would say, you have to see this piece, but you could never, ever buy it. And then, of course, you want it more.
Right, of course. Yeah. Fernando, do you have some pieces like that you've created and you just hold them close?
I don't, but I also feel like in this universe between art and jewelry, I'm such a comfortable person in the jewelry. I just think what I try to do that brings it close to this intersection with art is being very genuine and being extremely dedicated to the process of the creativity and the intention. But my jewelry is jewelry, and I love for women to desire. My work speaks about sensuality and desire, so it is part of the completion of the cycle that someone wants to wear it and buys it.
Yeah.
I have never been attached to a piece that I was like, no, I don't want to sell this one yet. Maybe it's still coming.
Right. Well, I mean, that's also, right? Creativity is an ongoing process.
Exactly. And I admire people who think wildly different to me. And, you know, when Mel describes artists that work like that, with that mindset, I respect them, but I also respect my own creative cycle, which ends with the jewelry being worn or the jewelry being super desirable to someone.
Melanie, you brought this up, and Fernando, then you brought up Solange, and the idea also of the inspiration that jewelry artists take from, sometimes it's from a historic piece like the ones Melanie, you saw at the Cartier show, and sometimes it's Victoire's exhibit. But the idea of jewelry being a community of artists, how strong do you think that sense is amongst the jewelry world?
I think it's very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I find whenever I go and see someone, they often say, who's doing what's going on? Because, you know, you're creating in this void of sort of like kind of emptiness, and, you know, people are desperate to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think at the top level, I think everyone is very supportive. Mm. Because they're completely different. As I say, we've said they have completely different styles. They're not competing with each other at the top level. They're just expressing their own creativity. But as we've said as well, you know, not all jewelry is great, and some is created to sell, and that area can be quite competitive. And a big problem is that people can copy each other, and it can get a bit tricky.
Yeah.
So I think really the level of design really sort of determines how much of a community you're looking at. But I think at Fernando's level, it is a community. Everyone kind of knows everyone. You know, you go to the same art shows and the same jewelry shows, and, you know, you will try and win an award at the TNC Awards, and everyone's kind of, you know, kind of quite jovial, but slightly kind of like hoping it will be them. And I think that's probably quite nice. I think it kind of spurs people on to greater heights.
Right. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, these are beautiful. Fernando, what's the stone here?
This is a chrysoprase.
Oh.
And this is from Fluid, my first collection. So,
you know, and Melanie, you mentioned the same fairs and the stone shows, right? That's where you, if we're talking about art, that's where you really discover your palette, right? Depending on what you buy there.
And sometimes you do see a kind of almost like sort of the fashion kind of seasons where you do see a stone. I remember when Tanzanite became like a really big stone, and suddenly it was kind of everywhere, you know. And when there's a new stone, you do see it in various places. I mean, you've got the classics, obviously, like the sort of the big rubies and the things. Yeah. But I'm really into sort of the newer stones that are coming out that give us a lot more choice in terms of subtlety of color. I think this is wonderful. I mean, I've completely got a soft spot for this color, but I love an opaque stone as well. I'd love to see more high jewelry with opaque stones.
Me too. Why do you think? Because it used to be, if you look at, you know, Cartier and Van Cleef, there was, you know, so much turquoise in high jewelry. There was so much lapis, certainly, and even cornelian. Why do you think that? I think it's starting to come back, but why do you both think, right, if we're looking at art, the palette and the materials certainly are a part of that discussion. Why do you think that really high jewelry shifted away from stones like a malachite or a turquoise, those opaque hard stones that I love too?
Does Fernando want to answer that, or shall I?
No, I don't think they are as shy as they used to be. I see more and more, and it excites me a lot. I've grown to like be following all the high jewelry collections, and I think there is a clever use of those stones nowadays. But yes, it can be incorporated more. I think I agree, and I love them, and they do different things in contrast with other stones or by themselves.
Yes.
I found that from the beginning of my creative work, they've been valued as much as the other stones. It's just that now, you know, there's more elements of jewelry that I want to play with, including the added value and the intrinsic value of the materials.
Right.
But I'm not frustrated with what I see happening in high jewelry at the moment. I feel like jewelry in general is super exciting for me at the moment.
Yes.
There is space for adventure.
I agree. There is. And when you mentioned the play of those opaque stones with brilliantly cut stones, that for me is when a piece really is. I mean, if someone shows me a piece with turquoise and amethyst, basically I'm done.
Yeah.
That is my, you know, and lapis and citrine. Those two combinations are a sure way to get me to fall in love with a piece. But speaking of materials, Fernando, do you have a new material that you might want to sort of tell us we might see in a collection?
I think my recent collection, Flame, I tried to include more citrines and smoky quartz because they are, you know, I grew up with these stones and I loved seeing them, and they are from Brazil. So all of a sudden, I think you realize there's not much newness being done. There's not much creativity. There is incredible jewelry from the past with citrines and smoky quartz. So this is what I'm bringing in as new, even though they're not new. I just want a new feel for those materials.
Right.
And then occasionally, you know, we're looking here at this bracelet with serpentine. When I see something I like, I just can't stay away from, and I bring it to my work, and it's a talking point. It becomes this excitement of putting it out in the world and then having people that really connect with it because they know what material it is and they've never seen anything designed like this, or they have absolutely no idea what material it is and then they want to learn.
Yeah.
So it's a great aspect of jewelry as well, and of color and materials, to be able to talk about and educate and transport people to different parts of the world.
Yes. Well, Melanie, the conversation that a piece of jewelry inspires is also a part of its artfulness, I think.
Yes, because I think you know, we kind of have to reach down into quite an ancient place. You know, we've been wearing jewelry since the dawn of time. And what has happened is, you know, the flowers we put in our hair, you know, 10,000 years ago are now, you know, diamond and gold flowers, but they're still flowers. They're still sort of part of that sort of ancient need to beautify from nature. So I think a lot of the things that we're talking about are sort of versions of nature, sort of but in a kind of a sculptured form. And even something like this, which is a kind of a sort of a pattern, right? It's still, for me, you know, these are stones, and sometimes we forget that all of these things are from the earth,
right?
And because we're so used to looking at jewelry, we forget that actually, you know, these aren't man-made things, you know. So I quite like that element as well. We're wearing something natural, which is permanent, which I think which makes it special.
So that cuff was Giampiero Bodino. Yes. And this is, the next slide is James de Jamashi Tephan. Yes. And both these jewelers don't really sell in any, you have to make an appointment. They're by appointment only, both of them. And how does how a piece of jewelry is sold impact the way it's perceived, do you think?
I think it's very impactful. I mean, if you have to go to the designer and you have to sit down and they explain it to you and they want you to have it, you know, some designers, you know, won't sell you something unless they want you to have it. I think that is part of the art process. You know, you just, it's like going to a gallery. And I think that's important because, you know, these are unique pieces which the artist may have taken 8 years to make. You know, they need you to understand the agony of creation so that when you wear it, you appreciate what they went through to create it. So I think I personally love that kind of the weight and, you know, the explanation and the relationship. I think it's all part of the art.
Yes. That experience, that very intimate, personal experience is, of course, the way jewelry used to be sold. It was very much the way you would commission a piece. That was part of the process. And you know, you could have someone counter argue that sort of keeps jewelry separate from certain people, and that it's more difficult to appreciate a jewelry artist's work if it's not more widely available. But that brings me to something else that you bring up in the book, and that fascinates me, which is the impact of Instagram on jewelry. And I'd love to hear where you both stand on it.
Can I just break in? I'm sorry, I could listen to you all night, but we're down to 10 minutes. I just want to give you the heads up because I could talk a lot about Instagram. I'm sure you guys could too.
All right. Well, I guess this will be the last question before. Do we have audience questions?
We do have a few questions. I just want to make sure you also had time for the slides.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, as we're talking, maybe if Siobhan can go through the slides so we see these pages from Melanie's gorgeous book. But Melanie and Fernando, we're talking about jewelry as art. And Melanie, your book, I mean, the images and the pieces in the book are art. I mean, they're depicted as art. It's a beautifully illustrated book. They are respected as art. The text in the book is as serious and engaging and beautiful as the images themselves. So the book presents jewelry as art. But you also do grapple with the impact that Instagram has had on jewelry and on the appreciation of jewelry. And so I'd love to, before we move to audience questions, just get your thoughts, both of your thoughts on this, sort of the modern dilemma, I would say.
I mean, I would say Instagram has opened jewelry to everyone. And it's democratized our knowledge of jewelry. You know, before you had to go to a museum or read a textbook and now it's just there. And obviously there are some fantastic people to follow on Instagram. It's changed everything. I'm sure there's a downside. You know, there's a pressure on designers to post things. You know, sometimes I see designers who are like, you know, this is taking me so long to make. If you put it on Instagram, it's kind of, I can't even, you know, do much with it because it's just out there. You know, you lose control, I think, of your visual kind of creation. So, I mean, I think it has its upsides and its downsides, like all digital technology. But I think overall, it has opened the club to everyone. I mean, Fernando may feel differently as the actual creator.
I feel I'm very cautious when it comes to, you know, change. I am quite traditional in the way I approach jewelry, but when I first launched my collection, the first ever gallery that sold my work put it up online, and it was already like it broke my ideas about how and this ritual of selling jewelry can be updated and modernized. And I think that, you know, behind Instagram and Instagram likes and followers, there are people. So you are engaging with people just in different ways. You have ways to engage with Instagram with integrity, with thoughtfulness and quality, and you have ways to engage, you know, just because it doesn't cost you anything to just post more. I approach my Instagram gradually as a storytelling tool. I do get a lot of interest, commercially speaking. People want to buy because they've seen it online. So it is super powerful. It is the way people approach something that they are interested in nowadays, whether it's another person's life or it's another person's work. So artists and jewelers can make good use of it. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not very millennial about it. And I struggle a little bit. You know, I freeze sometimes, but I follow your Instagram, Stellene, which is a source of, you know, it's a variety of themes, but with passion for jewelry. It educates, it inspires as well. It's not only one-sided. But I like to put my work online, and I find that recognizability is more protective now than, you know, hiding. I think in the world we live in, the more I share my new designs, the more they are protected by being known as mine. There's less confusion.
Yeah, that's really these are, I mean, so gorgeous. So gorgeous.
What a great, yeah.
I just before we go to audience questions, I just want to hold this up because everyone should see. I mean, it's on screen, but this book is so beautiful, Melanie.
I have mine.
The cover is so gorgeous. I look at how it reflects light.
I've got mine too.
I have mine too.
It's so beautiful, and for me, and the fact that it is so beautiful, but that it is so beautifully written, is a combination that I think really jewelry deserves. And so thank you for creating this book and for joining us tonight. But Jonathan, I know you have some audience questions, so you take it away. But you're muted.
Again.
I don't apparently believe in myself to unmute myself. Anyway, we just have a couple questions. One is the Cleopatra necklace. Was that commissioned? Did someone commission Bulgari for that?
I think it was part of the collection. I mean,
okay.
We'd have to ask them, but I don't think it was commissioned.
Okay, I think it was such a statement piece that
yeah,
it looked like.
It was a rather recent high jewelry piece.
Yeah.
And then I know this question is from someone I know who also makes. What are your thoughts on designers who don't make? You know, where does the art in the jewelry happen if the designer isn't actually also a maker? You know, Fernando, you're trained in the field and in the techniques. Is there a place where that exists, or is there a sliding scale? How does that work, or how do you guys view that?
Well, listen, this is a question in the visual arts as well,
sure.
Right? So it is, and it's a controversial one. But Fernando, what's your? I think the artist should speak.
I missed the very beginning of the question. It was about the designer and maker.
Yeah.
Was that the question? Yeah. So, I mean, I have to defend my position as in I came through jewelry. I came into jewelry as a designer. So my passions and that led me to jewelry are design, sketching, visualizing something. And then when I fell in love with jewelry, I tried to make it, but I realized there were craftsmen that had no vision of what they could do. They were incredibly skilled. So I took a step back and I decided to create a vision that they would execute under my direction. I moved to London, and in London, there are two very reputable schools, Royal College of Art and Central St. Martin's. Royal College of Art is more traditional in that their jewelry course is for jewelry makers. So it is very artistic. It's amazing, but at St. Martin's, it's about how you protect your creative process, still using other people's skills and not claiming it as yours. So I feel just by being honest and by having your process and using skills where they help to elevate your vision, and actually you help each other working with craftsmen, it's not taking away from them. It's actually us both together elevating our works. So that's how I see it. And I don't think it makes it any less artistic. It does make it more of a combined creation because it's someone else's skills and training. And in jewelry, I think that's most relevant. I don't think there's someone who could make all the different possibilities and techniques of jewelry by themselves. And there are no artists that can do. I mean, there are a lot of artists that don't execute their sculptures and their paintings. It's more about the vision.
Yeah, you show me a good wax carver and a good pave setter, and that's a genius.
Yes.
In one person.
With an incredible, point of view about jewelry. There are some.
Exactly.
There are some, and they should be celebrated.
Yeah. We only have 3 more minutes left, so I want to thank all my guests for coming and being part of this. Again, Melanie, thank you for putting this wonderful book together. Stellene, thank you for moderating.
Always.
And Fernando, it's a pleasure to meet you virtually. I hope next time in New York you stop by the 92nd Street Y. I'd love to have a larger conversation about artists and jewelry someday, so you're all invited. And I hope to see you all at New York Jewelry Week for the rest of the week. Please join me and Marian Faisal tomorrow night for our conversation about her new book, Beautiful Creatures, on the upcoming exhibition at the Museum of Natural History for the reopening of their Gems and Minerals Palace. But thank you all for joining. I'm going to sign out, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Melanie, Fernando. So wonderful to see you both.
Thank you. Great to talk to you both.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Fernando.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Stellene and Melanie.